Good afternoon. Thank you very much. Today I am present to inform you that the Western world is facing a significant threat. It is in danger because those who are supposed to defend the values of the Western world are co-opted by a worldview that inevitably leads to socialism and consequently to poverty and economic deprivation. Unfortunately, in recent decades, motivated by some well-intentioned desires to help others and others by the desire to belong to a privileged caste, the main leaders of the Western world have abandoned the model of freedom for different versions of what we call collectivism. We are here to tell you that collectivist experiments are never the solution to the problems that afflict the citizens of the world, but rather they are their cause. Trust me, there is no one better than us Argentines to provide testimony on these two issues. When we embraced freedom in 1860, in 35 years we became the world's first dominant power. 35 years we became the first world power. While when we embraced collectivism, over the past 100 years, we saw how our citizens began to systematically impoverish themselves until they fell to the 140th position in the world. But before we can have this discussion, it would be important for us to first look at the data that supports why free market capitalism is not only a possible system to end world poverty, but also the only morally desirable system to achieve it. If we consider the history of economic progress, we can see how from year zero until around 1800, the world's per capita GDP remained practically constant throughout the reference period. If one looks at a chart of the evolution of economic growth throughout human history, one would be seeing a chart with the shape of a hockey stick, an exponential function that remained constant for 90% of the time and exponentially shoots up from the 19th century. The sole exception to this stagnant history was at the end of the 15th century with America's discovery. Except for this, from year zero to 1800, global per capita GDP remained stagnant without any significant changes. Now, not only did capitalism generate an explosion of wealth from the moment it was adopted as an economic system, but if one analyzes the data, what is observed is that growth has been accelerating throughout the entire period. During the entire period between year zero and 1800, the per capita GDP growth rate remained stable at around 0.02% annually, that is, practically without growth. From 19th century, with Industrial Revolution, growth rate reaches 0.66%. Given the current rate, it would require a time span of approximately 107 years to achieve a twofold increase in per capita GDP. In 1900-1950, growth rate rises to 1.66% annually. We no longer need 107 years to double per capita GDP, but 66. If we take the period between 1950 and the year 2000, we can see that the growth rate was 2.1% annually, which would mean that in just 33 years, we could double the world's per capita GDP. This trend, far from stopping, remains alive even now. If we consider the period from 2000 to 2023, the growth rate increased again at 3% per year, meaning we could double our per capita GDP globally in only 23 years. Now, when studying per capita GDP from 1800 to today, what is observed is that after the Industrial Revolution, global per capita GDP multiplied by more than 15 times, generating an explosion of wealth that lifted 90% of the world's population out of poverty. We must never forget that by the year 1800, about 95% of the world's population lived in extreme poverty, while that number dropped to 5% by the year 2020, prior to the pandemic. The conclusion is obvious. Far from being the cause of our problems, free market capitalism as an economic system is the only tool we have to end hunger, poverty, and destitution throughout the planet. The empirical evidence is unquestionable. Therefore, as there is no doubt that free market capitalism is superior in productive terms, the left's doxa has attacked capitalism for its moral issues, for being, according to them, as its detractors say, unjust. They claim capitalism is bad because it's individualistic and collectivism is good because it's altruistic towards others. And thus they strive for social justice. But this concept that has become trendy in the developed world recently, in my country, it has been a constant in political discourse for over 80 years. The issue is that social justice is unfair and doesn't contribute to general well-being. On the contrary, it's an inherently unfair idea because it's violent. It's unfair because the state is financed through taxes, and taxes are collected coercively. Or can any of us confidently say that they pay taxes of their own free will? This implies that the state is funded through coercion, and that the higher the tax burden, the greater the coercion, leading to a reduction in freedom. Those who promote social justice start from the idea that the economy as a whole is a cake that can be distributed in a different way. But that cake is not given. It is wealth that is generated in what, for example, Israel Kirzner calls a market discovery process. If the good or service that a company offers is not desired, that company goes bankrupt unless it adapts to what the market is demanding. Create a high-quality product at a good price or attractive, succeed and produce more, so the market is a process of discovery where the capitalist finds the right direction on the go. But if the state punishes the capitalist for success and blocks him in this process, it destroys his incentives, and the consequences are that he will produce less and the cake will be smaller, generating harm to society. Collectivism, by inhibiting discovery and hindering appropriation, ties the entrepreneur's hands, preventing him from producing better goods and offering better services at a better price. How can it be then that from academia, international orgs, politics and econ theory, an econ system is demonized that not only has lifted 90% of the world's pop out of extreme poverty and does so increasingly faster, but is also fair and morally superior? Thanks to capitalism, the world is currently in its best moment. There has never been a moment in history with greater prosperity than the one we live in today. Today's world is freer, richer, more peaceful, and more prosperous than ever before. This is true for everyone, but particularly for those countries that are free, where they respect economic freedom and individual property rights. Because free countries are 12 times richer than repressed ones. Saying goes that in countries with freedom, people live better than 90% of population in repressed countries. Of libertarianism, the defense of life, freedom and property. Now, if free market capitalism and economic freedom have been remarkable instruments to eradicate poverty globally, and we are presently experiencing the most favorable period in human history, it is worth inquiring why I assert that the West is in jeopardy. I argue that the West is endangered as in countries defending free market, private property, and other institutions of libertarianism, sectors of the political and economic establishment, due to errors in their theoretical framework and ambition for power, undermine libertarianism, opening doors to socialism and potentially condemning us to poverty, misery, and stagnation. Because it should never be observed that socialism is always and everywhere impoverishing, failed in all countries where attempted. It was a failure economically, it was a failure socially, it was a failure culturally, and it also killed more than 100 million human beings. The main problem of the West today is that we not only have to confront those who, even after the fall of the wall and overwhelming evidence, continue to advocate for impoverishing socialism, but also our own leaders, thinkers, and academics who, sheltered in a misguided framework, undermine the foundations of the system that has given us the greatest wealth and prosperity in our history. The theoretical framework I am referring to is neoclassical economic theory, which designs an instrument unintentionally functional to the intrusion of the state, socialism, and the degradation of society. The issue with neoclassicals is that since the model they fell
知道吗？先锋集团就是所有的辉瑞制药、所有的科兴疫苗、所有的中国国药的疫苗的其中投资者股东。看看跟我们的老杂毛还有江家啥关系啊？跟鼎晖啥关系啊？哎，跟比尔盖茨啥关系啊？黑石啥关系？黑石占13.47%啊，就是海航的老板，王岐山的铁哥们儿，王岐山的情人，第一个投的人民币的啊，黑石集团、康斯德、罗登潘，老板姜志成，美国最大的养老基金，老杂毛养老基金，养谁的老啊？他老了，你死了。记得我在直播中说过，到英国，习近平 石墨烯节目记得了吧？英国帝国理工，你们记得我在直播中说过吧？你们可以查一查。华为曾在日本研究过石墨烯，实际上新基带的极限也是用的跟石墨烯是有关系的。石墨烯现在的核心技术只有英国、美国这2个国家控制了，绝大多数的是由先锋集团、黑石资本，还有我们的江泽民、江志成成立的在美国的基金。后来马云掺和了点钱，然后是俄罗斯的2大家族，这就是俄罗斯跟美国不为敌了，合作了。英国的几大家族、瑞士的几大家族，还有德国的家族，它是称为世界上70大家族全部参与进来。这70大家族基本上是沼泽地的51%的股东，包括了共产党老大毛。这些所有的这些东西控制到所有医药的最重要的10大原材料的80%。这些人记住啊，美国最受残害、死人最多这件是什么？什么毒啊？共产党的冰毒。除了冰毒之外，为啥美国不解决冰毒呢？这些专家、这些医学大佬们沼泽不解决冰毒呢？美国天天扫毒的，这些人咋不出手呢？美国几十年没解决了来自于美国死亡最多的冰毒，2个月之间解决出了能杀掉人类的冠状病毒。艾滋病让美国死那么多人，他们天天搞双休，他不怕死吗？不怕得艾滋病吗？没解决，没疫苗，2、3个月就出来了疫苗了。而且世界经济都被打垮了。我说了，世界的经济的网由它剪开了几段以后，成了经济梗、交通梗、贸易梗，什么梗都出来了。这个梗谁能控制，谁就是人类的老大呀。谁能控制这些原材料的药的成本，谁就是世界老大呀。药专家全部来自药厂，政府100%听，不是99%，是100%的所有医疗意见用什么药听他们的。这些人的钱来自药厂，药厂的股东是他们，一个生产药的成本是他们，让不让你吃药、吃多少药又是他们。就是荷兰的亲子基金，不是玩到荷兰的级别，就不是玩到最高级别的。荷兰下边是哪儿呢？大家记住啊，才是瑞士。瑞士下边是哪儿呢？才去什么马尔代夫啊、塞舌尔啊，还有这个什么St. Kitts啊、BVI 呀、巴哈马呀，在这种地方。所有在中东长的钱，所有在塞舌尔长，它的本质不同。塞舌尔都是最终持有者，他怎么会持有者呢？比如说江志成，你们要记住啊，就现在你看到所有的孙立军、马云、赵薇，还有黄什么龙她老公，还有一个就是现在的杨洁篪，还有王毅，还有这个陈国华，包括倪坚，包括这个王岐山、周亮，包括康点，所有这些人的大佬，最终的受益人都是江志成。记住我今天说的话，就习近平跟江志成比，在中国影响力，你如果在官方上说今天习近平来开会，江志成来开会，我告诉你，大多数人会去江志成的，不会去习呢。如果今天让军队大家举旗共反的时候，说现在你有俩选择，你跟江志成，你是跟习，一定是跟江志成。军队到今天，习认为自己全拿了，你别忘，你往回看中国军队总参谋长，除了杨绍武之外，汪东兴时代之外，所有中国军方中央警卫啊，我有些人名我不能说的，都咱哥们儿，几乎100%都是江家的。所有孙立军、马云、赵薇，所有这些人，包括恒大的一少半，今天的郭宝昌，他亲爹就是江志成。所有今天的科兴疫苗都是江志成。百度、抖音、滴滴打车、Zoom。全后边都是江志成的啊，只有华为、ZTE 还有稀土是习家的，只有这几样是他的。火葬场、养老保险王岐山家的，金融机构王岐山和朱家的，和江家的。人家江家唯一了，江平衡换了4次肾了，心脏也换了1次了啊，都是新疆人的心脏、新疆人的肾，好好的，但随时嘎嘣。然后江绵康在3部出来的，没什么能力。江家的姐妹里边没几个能人，然后生了一个养子叫王野，原来中心的副总裁，江泽民、王野平的亲侄女，在这第3个儿子。江家的传国人是谁呀？就是江志成，就是王野，就这几个人。那你现在人家江家把真正的军事权力、海外藏钱密码、海外关系都给了他。你问马云，马云所有的问题就是因为孙立军案牵扯到了马云，但是马云只能说孙立军，说孟建柱，他不可能说到王岐山，也不可能说到江志成。香港在昨天一天就发到了2.5亿支疫苗到香港，这2.5亿支要给香港700万人打的话，得打平均打多少啊？我的亲娘了，2.5亿支！昨天那姐们跟我说七哥，我们刚刚给香港发起2.5亿支，这是最新的科兴疫苗、高端疫苗。你们觉得中国接下去就看你们现在别听七哥的，就说这个判决出来这些病症对中国人会来2到3年会什么影响？基本上中国是还有以色列就这样的国家哈，这次送了模的，我是送了模的，基本上大人打给孩子都打，你很难面对这个事情。有的家人孩子比大人打的还多，他们认为这是给孩子的保护，很多很多。咱们科学家说，他说你知道七哥，我了解我们那个大院里面人，他说很多父母就认为给孩子多打一针是好事，他说你一点办法没有，很悲惨。你想想这1200种公布的，我认为啊5000种的疾病都不拉倒。我问科学家，科学家大概他说应该在这种1200个所谓公布的疾病里边，他说他每个病后面都有各种的所谓的反应，关联性的反应的症状大概在5000种左右。他说这5000种是足可以让你生不如死，每个人都是一个炸弹。他说特别是孩子在成长当中死了 是一个结果。他不死的话，这孩子不知道他能出现什么病，甚至这个在人身体里变异长出什么东西来，你都无法想象。他说这是为什么这个人类上经过地球这么多演变以后，长出什么大肿瘤啊，什么双脑症啊，什么子宫里边切出10斤20斤的瘤，这种事情发生，它就是这种所有的病毒在身体里边各种变异后的结果。所以科学家说，七哥，你当时你在船上，你这个说真正的灾难并不是病毒，是疫苗的时候，他说我就觉得你是有使命的人，天下唯有你能说出来，而且你是知道共产党邪恶的，也知道世界的邪恶。他说没有人能讲出这话了。他说就是中南坤那帮王八蛋设计这个东西，想干这东西，他就不会想到有这么严重的后果。这是已经完全失控了。很多人就是带着孩子，带着全家去打，就把爱用疫苗给了对方，就这么可怕。石墨乙烯这个词你找找，任何副作用都没有。真正的背后的黑手是社交媒体的背后的大佬和社交媒体。能控制社交媒体的人是谁呀？世界上还有几个？在深网里边大佬是共产党和俄罗斯，还有伊朗、北朝鲜，这叫邪恶五国。美国里边的赵志地，大家已经看到了美国的大选。那我今天告诉大家，政治疫苗未来发生是什么？媒体还会给帮他们掩盖。那么媒体被掩盖的结果会让这些疯狂的自己惹了麻烦，让各自国民打了30%、40%、50%的疫苗，什么意思知道吗？这个国民30%、40%、50%打了疫苗，几乎100%都是敌人。为什么100%是敌人？因为你这个人打了疫苗，你家朋友、你家亲戚他没打的和打的几乎都有社会联系。一个家人背后的3到4个5个家庭，这个打了疫苗的恐惧和死亡和副作用会影响到没打的一切，全包含了。这个时候就要追责，追责的时候是那是流血会死人的。唯一的政治家抓到了一根稻草，就是用媒体还有医疗界专家证明我做的决定是对的，我做的决定是正确的，甚至我做的决定是无辜的，甚至推给第三方，没有任何招。所以你能看到说我为什么要打疫苗？福奇、法国福奇什么说的，专家什么的。最后你记住啊，像辉瑞制药、科兴疫苗这些都会被追杀，全部破产。你是不是觉得赵哲地的坏人都会被受惩罚？恰恰相反，这早在计划之中。你本来就是我的炮声，你听到响的那一刻，你就已经粉身碎骨了。你本来就是我的二踢脚，我点着了，梆，听一响，当，第二响，你本来就是我的二踢脚嘛，你就该响嘛，是不是？受益者和操作者你是不知道的，牺牲者包括美国现在政府 CDC 专家，包括辉瑞制药现在股市，还有那些什么 CEO， 他这些人都是非执行者，极少数人。就像星球大战的最后，你发现穿黑衣服来的人就那么一个人坐着飞船来了，是吧？那家伙才是最大的坏蛋。所以说，兄弟姐妹们，不要恨身边的人，也不要以为全世界都是阴谋者，更不要分左派都是坏人，右派的坏人，右派的坏人比左派也不少，坏人也不分左右派，也不分大恶和小恶。这个里边啊，真正的万恶之首不是你，万恶之首真的就是共产党。不是我们要灭共才这么说，始发者、敢执行者就是共产党和那5个国家的哥们玩的。75亿人口就被那110个人玩，就这110个还是多数人，甚至更低。这里边1、2、3成的设计。那么我告诉你，今年的政治疫苗发生以后，社会会大动乱，经济会大崩溃。
Neoclassical economists think outside the box. When the model fails, don't get angry with reality. Get angry with the model and change it. The dilemma for the neoclassical model is that they aim to enhance market functioning by targeting perceived failures. By doing so, they not only open doors to socialism, but also undermine economic growth. For instance, implementing regulations on monopolies, dismantling their profits, and obliterating increasing returns would inevitably annihilate economic growth. In other words, each time you want to correct a presumed market failure, inevitably, due to not knowing the market or because you have become attached to a failed model, you are opening doors to socialism and condemning people to poverty. However, in the face of the theoretical demonstration that state intervention is harmful, the empirical evidence that it failed because it could not be otherwise, the solution that collectivists will propose is not greater freedom, but greater regulation, generating a downward spiral of regulations until we all become poorer and the lives of all of us depend on a bureaucrat sitting in a luxury office. Given the resounding failure of collectivist models and the undeniable advances of the free world, socialists were forced to change their agenda. They left behind the class struggle based on the economic system to replace it with other supposed social conflicts equally harmful to community life and economic growth. The first of these new battles was the ridiculous and unnatural fight between man and woman. Libertarianism already establishes equality between sexes. The cornerstone of our creed states that all men are created equal, that we all have the same unalienable rights granted by the Creator, among which are life, liberty, and property. This radical feminism agenda has led to increased state intervention, hindering the economic process. It provides jobs to bureaucrats who haven't contributed anything to society, whether through women's ministries or international organizations promoting this agenda. Another conflict that socialists pose is that of humans against nature. They argue that humans cause harm to the planet and that it must be protected at all costs,
王建。中国共产党是邪恶的达沃斯党，中国的所谓有钱人，什么马化腾啊，什么李彦富啊，什么王健林呐，轮不着你，看不着你，你是叫暴富。简句话说，你不够层次，你的财富还达不到帮我去管理奴隶的层次，而且非常清楚，你这个奴隶是我的3代奴隶，共产党是都听我的，我让他弄死你就弄死你，所以人家拿他当着玩。达沃斯论党之势力之大，你只知道昆仑山脉，你知道阿尔卑斯山周围是什么国家？瑞士、德国、比利时、意大利、法国，骄傲的法国，还有那个傲慢的德国。阿尔卑斯山就是欧洲的昆仑山脉、喜马拉雅。但是达沃斯党控制了所有的阿尔卑斯山所有的资源，滑雪，阿尔卑斯山下的水，你看帕米尔高原的水是中国共产党多年喝的水，阿尔卑斯山的神圣的山顶之水谁喝？你花多少钱都买不。他们坐落在哪里？瑞士达沃斯。瑞士最牛叉的 UBS 银行是王岐山第一个来伤害七哥的爆料革命。你再看那个单伟健这个孙子，是桥水基金 Redelio 的 TPG 的 PAG 太平联盟的。你看看那个单伟健，几乎达沃斯论党的所有人都去了一遍，结果是跟谁呀？共产党的所有几个情报机构全混在一起。就单伟健这个人要不被美国西方政府抓了，不可能有达沃斯有什么事。就是共产党在西方存的钱，像 UBS 银行、像德意志银行、像海航这样的，他不出事，我们的黑暗还找着呢。答案是跟达沃斯之战是黑暗与阳光之战，几乎很难很难。但是共产党一定会被消灭，但是他会尝试在中国培养出一个让你看上去比共产党好的所谓的另外一个奴隶主啊！你看我让你选举啊，我让你民主啊，是吧？然后呢，他的财富继续拥有，继续奴隶中国人。这是我们新中联邦的另外一层力量，很艰难。但是我相信有新中联邦的诞生之后，达沃斯论党想在中国再继续存下去的可能性几乎没有，我们会做到的。
Today, states don't need to control means of production to control every aspect of individuals' lives. With tools such as monetary issuance, debt, subsidies, interest rate control, price controls, and regulations to correct alleged market failures, they can control the destinies of millions of human beings. This is how we have reached the point where, with different names or forms, good parts of the politically accepted offers in most Western countries are generally collectivist variants. Whether they openly declare themselves as communists, fascists, Nazis, socialists, social democrats, national socialists, Christian Democrats, Keynesians, neo-Keynesians, progressives, populists, nationalists, or globalists. In the end, there are no substantive differences. Everyone argues that the state should control all aspects of individuals' lives. All define a model contrary to the one that led humanity to the most spectacular progress in its history. We are here today to extend an invitation to the other Western countries to resume the path towards prosperity. Economic freedom, limited government, and unrestricted respect for private property are vital for economic growth. The impoverishment that collectivism produces is not a fantasy, nor is it fatalism. It is a reality that Argentinians have known very well for at least 100 years. Because we have already experienced it, we have already gone through this. Because, as I said before, since we decided to abandon the model of freedom that had made us rich, we are trapped in a downward spiral where we are getting poorer every day. This is, we have already experienced it ourselves, and we are here to warn you about what can happen if Western countries who became rich with the model of freedom continue on this path of servitude. The Argentine case is the empirical proof that regardless of wealth, natural resources, population capability, education level, or the amount of gold bars in the central bank's coffers, these factors do not guarantee success. If measures are adopted that hinder the free functioning of markets, free competition, free price systems, if trade is hindered, if private property is attacked, the only possible destination is poverty. To summarize, I want to convey a message to all entrepreneurs present and those who are not, but are following us from around the globe, whether they're here or not, physically. Don't be intimidated by the political caste or the parasites who live off the state. Don't yield to a political class that only wants to prolong its power and preserve its privileges. You are social benefactors. You are heroes. You are the creators of the most extraordinary era of prosperity we have ever experienced. Don't let anyone say ambition is immoral. If you earn money, it's because you provide a superior product, better price, contributing to well-being. Do not yield to the advance of the state. The state is not the solution. The state is the problem itself. You are the true protagonists of this story, and know that from today, you have Argentina as an unconditional ally. Thank you very much, and long life freedom, damn it.